Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to go beyond those big headlines of LGBTQ plus history and right into the heart of America.
Okay.
You shared this book called Farm Boys, Lives of Gay Men from the Rural Midwest.
Right.
And we're going to uncover together what it was like to grow up gay on a midwestern farm
Yeah.
before the sexual revolution really took hold.
It is it's really a collection of stories, really personal stories that often were silenced.
Wow.
It is a glimpse into a world that a lot of people just might not even realize existed.
You know, it seems like such a paradox.
Mm-hmm.
The Midwest,
Yeah.
often seen as just like the picture of traditional values.
Oh, right.
And then these men
Yeah.
grappling with their sexuality in a time when it was largely taboo.
Yeah.
What are we going to discover as we dig into this?
We're going to see how these men navigated their identities within a culture that had very strict gender roles.
Yeah.
We'll explore the impact of isolation, the yearning for connection, and ultimately the resilience of the human spirit.
Okay, let's dive in.
All right.
Right off the bat.
Yeah.
The book mentions this farm boy fantasy.
Okay.
It sounds a little suggestive.
Yeah.
What exactly is that all about?
Well, the author himself is a gay man
Okay.
who grew up on a farm.
Okay.
And when he put a call out for stories, he received a letter from a man in suburban Chicago who was looking for a cute farm boy for a romantic fling.
Okay.
And he described this idealized image of a rustic encounter with fresh coffee and horseback riding.
So it's almost like this outsider's romanticized view
Yeah.
of what it means to be a gay farm boy.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And it highlights that tension between the urban and rural perceptions of gay life.
But the book doesn't just focus on that fantasy.
No, not at all.
Right.
It delves into the real lives of these men.
Yeah.
Their struggles, their triumphs, and the complexities of their experiences.
So how did growing up on a farm in the Midwest actually shape how these men understood their own sexuality?
Right.
I imagine it was pretty different from growing up in, say, a more urban environment.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Farm life was built around traditional gender roles. Men worked in the fields.
Yeah.
Women took care of the house.
Yeah.
And within that very rigid structure,
Right.
a lot of these men felt like they didn't quite fit in.
Wow.
They described feeling like misfits.
Yeah.
And they sensed that they were somehow different from the other boys.
You mentioned limited information about sexuality.
Right.
Did these guys even have access to accurate information
Yeah.
about homosexuality growing up?
For many, especially those who came of age,
Okay.
in the early to mid 20th century, information about homosexuality was practically non-existent.
Wow.
Some came across a 1964 Life magazine article
Okay.
about homosexuality in America, but even that was a bit of a double-edged sword.
Okay.
It was groundbreaking for the time, but it also presented a pretty negative view of homosexuality.
It must have been incredibly isolating.
It was.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to figure yourself out with practically no resources, no one to talk to, and only these whispered rumors or negative portrayals in the media.
Right.
It's no wonder so many of them felt alone and confused.
In that kind of environment, how did they cope with these feelings?
Yeah.
Did they try to suppress them?
Many of them did.
Yeah.
And the book talks about this best little boy response.
What is that?
They excelled in school. They worked hard on the farm. They were very active in their churches.
Yeah.
It was almost like they were overcompensating for feeling different, trying to prove their worth.
Yeah.
And maybe even silence their own doubts.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Sound like they were carrying a heavy burden.
Absolutely. And it really underscores the psychological toll of living in a society that doesn't accept you for who you are.
Did they have anyone to talk to?
Well,
any sense of community?
That really depended on the time period.
Okay.
Those who came of age before the sexual revolution often felt incredibly isolated.
Right.
But as urban gay communities started to emerge in the late 60s and 70s, some of these men found a lifeline.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I imagine it wasn't easy to just pick up and leave their lives behind.
Right.
To find that community.
You're right.
Yeah.
For many, that world felt very foreign and even intimidating.
Yeah.
And remember, even finding information was difficult,
right?
Let alone finding others who shared their experiences.
The book features stories from over 20 men, which means a lot of different perspectives.
Right.
Are there any that really stand out as particularly impactful?
Each story is unique, but there are a few that really highlight the range of experiences that these men had. Cornelius Utz, for example. He was born in the early 1900s. And his story adds another layer of complexity because he was both Black and gay.
Wow.
That intersection of race and sexuality made his journey even more challenging.
I bet facing those dual stigmas in that era must have been incredibly difficult.
It was.
Yeah.
Then you have Henry Bauer, who went through years of therapy.
Oh, wow.
Struggling to reconcile his faith with his sexuality.
Yeah.
His story really brings home the psychological toll that societal stigma can take.
It's amazing how he was able to navigate such a personal and complex struggle.
Absolutely. And then there's James McKay, who had this fascination with farm workers.
Interesting.
He couldn't openly express his desires.
Right.
So he channeled them into a fictional love story that he wrote about a high school crush.
It sounds like he found a creative outlet for feelings that he couldn't express openly.
Right.
That's really interesting. What about Doug Edwards?
Yeah.
I know you highlighted his story for this episode.
Yeah.
What made his experience so compelling?
Doug's story is particularly poignant because it illustrates the fear and danger that kind of permeated that era. He lived in constant terror of being found out.
Oh, wow.
Especially after a neighbor's son came out as gay.
Yeah.
And his father committed suicide.
Oh, wow. That's
yeah.
a powerful reminder of the devastating impact of prejudice and intolerance.
That incident really hammered home the potential consequences of living with such a secret.
It's hard to even imagine living with that kind of fear.
Yeah.
It speaks of the power of societal norms and that pressure to conform.
Right.
Even if it means like denying a core part of yourself. Speaking of societal pressures.
Yeah.
What about their families?
Yeah.
Did these men ever come out to their parents?
It really varied. Some families were surprisingly accepting, while others reacted with silence or even the possibility of rejection.
Yeah.
Remember, this was a time when homosexuality was often seen as a mental illness or a moral failing.
Right, and in small rural communities,
right,
family ties run deep.
Yeah.
I imagine coming out was a huge risk.
It was a massive risk.
Yeah.
These men were essentially risking rejection, not just from their family, but from their entire community.
So for those who did find acceptance, what did that look like? Were there any particularly heartwarming stories in the book?
Richard Kilmer's story comes to mind. When he finally came out to his mother, she simply said, "I've always known."
Wow.
It wasn't a big dramatic scene,
but
a quiet acceptance
Yeah.
that speaks volumes about the power of a mother's love.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even in the most conservative environments,
Right.
there can be these pockets of love and understanding.
It really is.
Yeah.
And even though not every story had such a happy ending,
Right.
it's important to remember that relationships were incredibly important
Yeah.
to these men.
Okay.
Some did manage to find partners and create loving, supportive relationships.
Even back then.
Yes. Remember, this book covers a wide span of time.
Right.
From the early 1900s all the way to the mid-1980s.
Okay.
As societal attitudes started to shift, even if slowly, some of these men felt empowered to live more openly, forming committed relationships, and in some cases, even raising families of their own.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It speaks to the human desire for connection, regardless of your background or sexual orientation.
Exactly. And it underscores the fact that LGBTQ plus history isn't just a story of struggle and hardship, but also a story of love resilience and the enduring human spirit.
We've been focusing a lot on the challenges these men faced.
Right.
But I'm curious about those who did find some measure of peace and fulfillment. What did their paths look like?
Many found solace in different ways.
Okay.
Some found comfort in their religious faith.
Okay.
Others through creative pursuits like writing or music. And as we discussed earlier, some were fortunate enough to find a sense of community within the emerging urban gay culture.
It's fascinating to think about those who found solace in religion.
Yeah.
It seems almost counterintuitive.
Right.
Given the way religion has often been used to condemn homosexuality.
It is an interesting paradox.
Yeah.
But for some, faith offered a source of strength.
Okay.
a framework for understanding their place in the world,
Yeah.
and a sense of belonging,
Okay.
even if they couldn't openly express their sexuality within their religious communities.
That speaks to the complexity of human experience, doesn't it?
It does.
Even within seemingly rigid structures, people can find ways to adapt and create meaning.
Absolutely. And that adaptability
Yeah.
is a key theme that emerges from these stories.
Yeah.
Despite the immense challenges they faced,
Right.
these men found ways to carve out lives for themselves, to find moments of joy, and to make their own unique contributions to the world.
So while there's definitely a strong undercurrent of hardship,
Right.
it's inspiring to hear that many found ways to not only survive, but to thrive.
It really is, and their stories offer a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
We talked about the farm boy fantasy earlier,
Yeah.
this idea of a romanticized rural encounter.
Yeah.
Did the book explore this concept from the perspective of the farm boys themselves?
It did, and some of these men shared that they felt objectified or fetishized
Really?
by some urban gay men.
Interesting.
It was like their rural background was viewed as a novelty or a curiosity
Okay.
rather than a core part of who they were.
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
So even as they were trying to find acceptance within the gay community,
Right.
they were sometimes confronted with yet another set of stereotypes and expectations.
Exactly. And it highlights the complexities of representation
Yeah.
and the importance of recognizing diversity even within marginalized groups.
Right.
Being LGBTQ+ doesn't mean you fit into a neat little box.
Right. There's a vast spectrum of individual experiences and identities.
It makes you wonder if that feeling of being othered, even within your own community,
Yeah.
is something that many LGBTQ+ individuals experience, regardless of where they grew up.
That's a great point. It really gets at this idea of intersectionality,
Okay.
how different aspects of our identity can overlap and influence our experiences.
Earlier you mentioned that some of these men continued to struggle with internalized guilt,
Yeah.
even later in life. Why do you think that was so prevalent?
Well, remember that many of these men grew up being told that homosexuality was wrong, a sin, even a sickness.
Right.
That kind of messaging,
Yeah.
especially from authority figures like parents, teachers, or religious leaders,
Right.
can be deeply damaging
Yeah.
and leave lasting scars.
It's like that negative messaging becomes ingrained in your psyche.
Exactly. And it can take a lot of strength and self-acceptance
Right.
to overcome those ingrained beliefs.
That's why therapy and supportive communities are so vital.
Okay.
For LGBTQ+ individuals, especially those who have experienced rejection or trauma.
This deep dive is really making me think about the layers of history,
Yeah.
societal norms, and personal experience that have shaped the lives of LGBTQ+ individuals,
Right.
especially in rural America.
It is fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it reminds us that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It continues to influence our present
Right.
and our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Okay, before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I want to circle back to something you said earlier.
Okay.
You mentioned how some of these men actually felt a sense of pride
Yeah.
in their rural background.
Yeah.
How did that manifest?
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Despite the challenges they faced,
Okay.
some of these men found a way to embrace both their sexuality and their rural roots.
Okay.
They saw their upbringing as a source of strength, resilience, and a deep connection to the land.
That's amazing. It's like they were able to find a sense of belonging
Yeah.
in two seemingly disparate worlds.
Exactly. And some even felt that their rural upbringing gave them a unique perspective,
Okay.
a sense of independence, and a strong work ethic
Yeah.
that served them well throughout their lives.
It really challenges the stereotypes, doesn't it?
It does.
We often hear about the struggles of LGBTQ+ individuals in rural communities.
Yeah.
But these stories show that it's not always like a simple narrative of rejection and isolation.
Exactly. There's so much nuance
Yeah.
to these experiences.
Right.
And this book does a really great job of capturing that complexity.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Farm Boys, what are some of the key insights that you hope our listener will take away from this conversation?
Well, I hope that this conversation has really shed light on a hidden chapter of LGBTQ+ history.
Right.
These men's stories remind us that the fight for acceptance and equality has been long and complex.
Yeah.
And that even in seemingly homogenous communities,
Right.
there's a richness of individual experience that often goes unseen.
I think it's really powerful to hear these stories in their own words. It brings history to life
Yeah,
in a way that textbooks just can't.
I completely agree. Personal narratives have a way of cutting through the abstract.
Right.
And reminding us that history is ultimately about real people's lives.
And as the book's author asks, will society ever truly embrace its LGBTQ plus members?
Right.
Moving beyond mere tolerance to genuine understanding and acceptance. That's a question I'll be pondering for a long time.
It is a crucial question, and one that we all have a role in answering.
Yeah.
We can't just passively wait for society to change. We have to be active participants in that change.
So what can our listener do to foster that deeper understanding and acceptance?
Well, it starts with listening to stories like these.
Okay.
Educating ourselves about the history and experiences of LGBTQ plus individuals, and challenging our own biases and assumptions.
Right.
It's about being an ally, an advocate, and a voice for those who are still struggling to find their place in the world.
That's such a powerful message.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to create a more inclusive and equitable world.
We do, and I hope that this deep dive has equipped our listener with some new perspectives.
Yeah.
And a renewed sense of purpose in that endeavor.
On that note, we'll leave you to continue your own deep dive into this fascinating and important topic.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.